he got a little beard now. Probably. What's happening, man? Hey, let anybody in here, huh? What's up? You know Muhal? How are you? He's a piano player, man. Teacher down here, down in this area. Longtime friend of mine. Greg Tate.
How you doing? Good.
Huh? I hope so. I've had fun already. We haven't even started.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Philly's got some stuff. Historically. Something about Philly reminds me of Detroit. I don't know why those two places have always reminded me of each other a little bit. You know.
With a little more street life.
Yeah. I mean, it's an East Coast thing, but still, there's something that's been similar to the two cities. I mean, kind of how the scenes are kind of, I don't know how to say it. They have strong local scenes, you know. I mean, you know, and you know how the musicians in Detroit, there's like a certain kind of sound. You know, a lot of those cats had Tommy and all those guys. You know, there's a certain kind of sound. Philly was a little bit more, I would say, avant-garde in some ways. You know, I mean, although Detroit had some of that too. Oh, certain time, like when Doug Hammond and them was there, they was doing a lot of experimentation among their group of cats.
So there's a guy from the artist.
Huh?
When
was what?
What's the name?
In Detroit,
Of Chicago? About.
I guess it was like the 60s, early 70s.
Something on the
You know.
show, the drawings.
Yeah, that would have been after. That would have been after.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
You know when he's coming at you.
Sure.
Did you know Charles Miles? Yeah. Did you know him? Charles Miles? Alto player? Charles Miles.
I don't remember.
He was in Chicago so much. I thought he was from Chicago, but it turned out he was from Detroit. Yeah. This cat was funny, man, because he played in a style that was something like Bird, but without none of the licks that Bird played. You know, most of those cats who play like that, they copy Bird's lines, you know. And he didn't have. And so I asked this cat. I was like, yeah, he's older than me, you know. Charles Miles. Did you know him? Charles Miles, alto player. You know,
In Chicago?
He was in Chicago a lot, but he was out of Detroit. And, you know, but I thought he was from Chicago when I was younger. You know, so I asked this cat. I was like, "Well, what are you doing, man?" Because I mean, it sounds logical, but there's something, you know. And he was self-taught, and he started telling me about his concept. He said it's all seconds. You know, and he started talking about second. I couldn't make out nothing that this cat was saying, man. He kept saying, you know, everybody had their own language, you know. And he kept saying, no, everything's a second. Everything's hooked up with seconds, you know, and stuff like that. And I'm like, what's this cat talking about, you know? But it freaked me out. And years later, I kind of like developed some stuff off of just what I thought he was saying. I really didn't know what he was saying, you know.
You ever try to figure out what Eddie Lockjaw Davis is doing?
Oh yeah, we talked about Lockjaw. Yeah. Now, you talking about some snakes?
I was with Frank Foster, Frank West, and Frank Foster. And I knew how to get under their skin, you know. So, because see, when they used to travel, they used to imitate all the tenor players. Somebody do stick, somebody do train.
Right.
They was in front of all these people, so I put them on the spot. I said, well, both of you all sat next to Eddie Lockjaw Davis. What was he doing? Show me what was he
Hi, and
Shut
welcome
up,
back.
Fred.
Welcome, everyone.
No, you sat right next to me.
I'm Amy Sadow. I'm the director here at the Institute of Contemporary Art, and I am so honored both to be able to host and present a Philadelphia version of the Freedom Principle, but of course tonight to be able to think about that show, the show that we'll have up through March, and all of the just interlaced ideas around improvisation, collectivity, and experimentation that this exhibition and the work of incredible black collectives like the AACM and AfriCobra bring to us. In conjunction with the Freedom Principle, ICA has layered on an additional exhibition called Endless Shout, which is, in essence, a series of performances The next iteration is with the choreographer and dancer Taisha Paget. It will happen this weekend in the galleries. So Saturday and Sunday, I believe they're at 1 and 3. Will be these different meditations with breath with Taisha, and she's joined with another dancer. So please join us for the next iteration of Endless Shout, and help me welcome my friends from Creative Capital, particularly my colleague Susie, who will be introducing our esteemed panel.
Hi, everyone. Good evening and welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. So, as Amy said, I'm Susie. I'm the President and Executive Director of Creative Capital. I keep calling myself new, but I'm not so new anymore. But anyway, Creative Capital, since 1999, has funded the work of some of this country's most influential artistic voices. From visual to performing arts, from literature to moving image, and to our ever-evolving emerging fields category, our 642 awardees have helped advance our understanding of often complex and daunting topics. We surround these bold, creative individuals with support structure that includes strategic planning, advisory services, a network of arts professionals, and programs like this one. In addition to our core awards, Creative Capital also oversees 2 ancillary programs, the Arts Writers Grant Program and the Doris Duke Performing Artist Awards. By incubating these grant-making programs, we further extend our reach to even more artists in all disciplines. It is our hope that tonight's program and other creative conversations that we can do in partnership with such remarkable organizations as ICA will help build bridges, not just among artists, but also among activists, policymakers, thought leaders, working around similar issues, and that they will position art and artists as integral to realizing personal, cultural, social, and legislative change. Tonight's collaboration with the ICA highlights 4 of the many Creative Capital artists and Doris Duke awardees included in the Freedom Principle show. And I hope you've all seen it, and if you haven't, you better make sure you do. We're bringing together this group of artists, to discuss the historic importance and contemporary implications of this amazing exhibition and their collaborative work. In light of the current threats to arts funding and artistic freedom of expression, it feels incredibly important to celebrate these artists, their creative voices, and their commitment to collaborative experimentation. I will let our moderator, the incomparable Greg Tate, introduce these brilliant artists more fully. But in addition, I wanted to say to all of you here live in the audience, we also have people across the country tuned in right now to our live stream, thanks to PhillyCam. So yay, PhillyCam.
Wow.
We want to lend our voices to this conversation. So we are also live tweeting right now. And so be sure to tag our handle at CreativeCap and at ICA Philadelphia. And use our hashtag Creative Convos to tag your questions and comments during and after the program so we can continue the discussion. A few of our artists have offered to respond to your tweets, so expect a response, and we'd love to know what's on your mind. Also, since we are recording live, we ask that you please take a moment to silence your phones. But all in all, we are really, really grateful to the Institute of Contemporary Art for partnering with us this evening, and I want to thank Amy, Murray, Anthony, Jill, and Heather, and the rest of the crew, Derek, and the rest of the crew. But I also want to say congratulations on a really phenomenal, remarkable exhibition, which has really, which is one of many ongoing programs you have presented here, and really establishing yourself as one of the most prominent voices in contemporary art, so bravo. Of course, a hearty thank you to Greg Tate as well for moderating our conversation, but of course, a most special thanks to our phenomenal artists, Colleen, Muhal, Henry, and Steve, for really being here tonight and sharing your work and your experiences with us. I hope you will all, I won't be doing my job, I didn't say this. You will be visiting our website, creative-capital.org, to learn more about all of our awardees and how you can help support their work. And now, to kick off the program, I want to introduce our moderator, Greg Tate, who really needs no introduction, but a musician, producer, writer, critic, but mostly a leading voice in black music and culture. Greg is a founder of the improvisational ensemble Burnt Sugar and former staff writer for The Village Voice. His work has also been published in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Art Forum, Downbeat, etc., etc. His book of essays, Flyboy 2, was just published last year. Woo, 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 woo. And in particular, it was critically reviewed in The New Yorker by a young critic who was incredibly inspired by Greg. Wasu wrote of Flyboy 2, Greg Tate's best paragraphs throb like a party and chatter like a salon. They're jam-packed with names and references that shouldn't go along, but do. For a generation of critics, Tate's career has served as a reminder that diversity isn't just about a splash of color in the group photo. It's about the different ways that people see, feel, and move within the world. So with that, I leave you with Greg Tate.
Good evening, Philly ICA, studio audience and home audience, live stream. Since you all have the programs, I don't have to give you everyone's bona fides, curriculum vitae and such. That's Henry Threadgill, that's Colleen Smith, that's Muhal Richard Abrams, that's Steve Coleman. It's an extraordinary opportunity for us all to be in a room where we can hear conversation among all this black exceptionalism, black excellence, mastery, legacy, legend. I'm just going to jump right in and begin by asking Muhal to really talk to us about Chicago and the Chicago that formed him and in turn provided the seed bed for what became the AACM. Because we were upstairs talking about all the extraordinary musicians you had an opportunity to see, to study with, to experience, throughout your professional career. So Chicago, why there? Why Chicago? What was happening in Chicago?
Well, I don't know, except I was born there. And, so that, I guess the rest is about what the atmosphere was like as I grew up in Chicago. There was always a lot of music. In fact, let me say this. I was born on the south side of Chicago. So the south side of Chicago was mainly all black people. You know what I mean? And with some white people, but mainly all black people. So the atmosphere I grew up in, there were black people sort of enjoying black culture. I mean, the city was in some areas quite racist. You know what I mean? But that didn't seem to interfere with how we saw the South Side. It was like festive, in terms of how we approached culture and art. There were musicians, there were painters, poets, all sorts of people. And so, that's what the atmosphere was like. And also, there was no areas that objected to other areas, you know what I mean? People seemed to do exactly what they wanted to do. And everybody else just showed an appreciation for it or just ignored it. You know what I mean? So it was more or less an atmosphere like that. And to get into the meat of the music part, there was music all the time. Just every day there was some sort of music. And what one had to do, one had to finally position oneself through practice and mimicry and whatnot like that. And being on the scene had to, actually equip oneself to like stay on the scene and become a part of the scene. So, in other words, you became a street person, you know, and so that's it. You just, it was that type of an atmosphere that the AACM, Sun Ra, and many others developed out of. You know what I mean? Because, as I mentioned earlier, there was no one to object to what you were doing because people just didn't do that. Mm-hmm. They were busy minding their business. And so the AACM really started from an idea that I had, but it was purely selfish, really. I was doing a lot of study of different areas, you know what I mean? In terms of music, I was studying different concepts that I would encounter in books or whatever like that, because I'm mainly self-taught. And I noticed that the books that they taught, for instance, taught harmony theory in the schools, were readily available in the stores. So I would buy the books and teach myself without a curriculum, so I could go at my pace. So I more or less, you know, moved in that manner. So I got to a point that I needed to have somewhere to like compose music and hear it. So I organized the experimental band. And the purpose of the experimental band was to, for each member in the band to explore his or her individualism. And I was fortunate enough to find souls or spirits who could buy into that. Mm-hmm. And that's how it started. And from the experimental band example, we got to a point where we decided to try and have enlarge the situation to include other musicians in the city. So we invited all the musicians in the city to come and talk about the idea of doing your own music, whatnot like that. And some came, some agreed with the idea, some wanted to do standard music, and we told them they could continue to do standard music, but not at AACM. They had to do their own music, you know, which was fine. We weren't against anything, we were for something. So basically that's pretty much what took place there. You know, a lot of ways to speak about it, but mainly that's just a short piece of information concerning the path of how it.
Well, something I've been meaning to ask you since the last time we talked in this kind of setting, I think it was when George Lewis's book came out, but some information that came my way was that in 1963, Martin Luther King gave a speech where he also advocated for the creation of what he called an AACM, and he described it as the Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment. Right? And I've always wondered whether that was zeitgeist or whether you were aware of that speech. And because his whole notion was that in the face of racism, oppression, one needed to be psychologically maladjusted to what was considered the normative in American society.
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Let me say this. The whole idea in terms of the AACM experimental band was like strictly from us, the name. We created the name at one meeting. We created the name. We decided to call it the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, just like that. But let me also say this. What year was that you're talking about?
63 was that.
Okay, so during the 60s, especially in Chicago and other places, there was an atmosphere of like, take care of yourself, do for yourself. You follow me? Mm-hmm. So, with that being the case, it's possible that Martin Luther King's idea or the wording of his idea could have been similar to that, just like there are other organizations, I think. NAACP, the whole thing. See, but it all had its meaning, as that meaning should pertain to the work or the creation of the creative thing that we were doing. You know, it's hard to put into words because after a while I just want to play a chord or something, hit a note. Right. Words. But anyway, you know, but I love words, and I mean, when I want to use well, but this is something a little different. Anyway, that's pretty. The similarity, I don't know how that may achieve.
Well, this exhibition that's here at the ICA Philadelphia began in Chicago. It's called the Freedom Principle. I know that one of the early documenters of what the AACM was doing, I believe it comes from his book, John Litweiler, right? But I wanted to talk to each of you about this notion of freedom as it pertains to creativity and the creativity that you all have pursued. And I kind of want to lean into that through Sun Ra, because Sun Ra famously said that he didn't like the term free jazz. He wasn't interested in freedom. He was interested in discipline, right? And I was wondering whether that notion of freedom and discipline being mutually exclusive was something that resonated with you all or not.
You talking to me?
Oh, I'm talking to everyone now. that's a jump on in the water's fine, but well, yes.
You sound like taxi driver.
You sound just like that.
Right.
Are you talking to me?
So look, why don't we have Ms. Colleen Smith? What do you think about freedom and discipline?
I mean, the moment you brought up the freedom principle, I instantly thought about Sun Ra, because I love that line and his way of poking fun at the legions, like seeking freedom, and while he's looking at sort of like the chaos, like undermining certain institutions within our communities. And I have no qualms with either position, but I was really drawn to this notion that inside of structure and discipline there is all manner of freedom, but it's fluid, and the structures that we build around ourselves can shift and change as we need them to. So, and I guess in that's where all the freedom lies, in that consensus around what the structures are that we're going to function within.
Yeah. Well, you and I have had some very interesting conversations over the years about notions of filmmaking, in industry norms, experimental norms. You, in my mind, have positioned yourself as someone who's looking for a fourth or a fifth or a sixth way around orthodoxies on both sides.
It's so amazing to be talking about this right after Moonlight wins an Oscar, because in that film, it's not just that it's the first time a film by a black director wins Best Picture. It's that he does it through experimental and avant-garde disciplines.
Elaborate on that.
And that is not an accident, that the first film that a black filmmaker would make to win an Oscar would would be experimental in form is not an accident at all. It's inevitable because it's through the way in which Black culture has the relationship between Black culture and experimentation is actually where, like, there's a sublime power in that, and it's our primary contribution to culture always. So, but yeah, the seventh way of cinema. I'm still not satisfied. You know, I'm waiting and working towards it. You know?
Well, Mr. Threadgill, freedom, discipline, Sun Ra.
Sun Ra?
I'm also just curious about the first time you encountered Sun Ra.
Well,
too. Yeah.
I encountered Sun Ra because of, I live not too far from John Gilmore, and I also Virgil Pumphrey, who became Absalom Ben Shalomo, stayed across the street from Ronnie Boykins, was the bass player.
Is that mic on?
Is it on? You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Oh, you can hear me now. Okay. Okay. So we were Absalom Ben Shalomo. We came along together, grammar school to high school, started playing music when we got to high school. And Sun Ra rehearsed on 63rd Street in Chicago in the back of a wild game meat market. Possums, bear, meat, all these kind of things hung. And in the back, it was like a Greek guy that owned this market, and he would let Sun Ra have the back of the market to rehearse. So we were like 13, 14, when we first started going to these rehearsals. And I really didn't know that much about what Sun Ra was doing at that time. You know, we were just listening there, trying to learn something. It was much later, I think I met Phil Coran, and then I met Muhal. Things turned around after I met Muhal. When I got to college, when I got to junior college, this was in '62, we had a music club. And I think it was in '63 we invited Muhal with a group there with, I think it was Betty Dupree and who was the tenor player, Muhal, and the trumpet player with the gray eyes.
What Erskine Brody was it?
Huh?
Was it Erskine Brody?
No, it wasn't Erskine. But you had this group. We invited Muhal there, and he invited me to come to CNC's, to the experimental band. And so there was no AACM at this time. And so I went there, and that's when I got introduced to what Muhal was doing and where he was going, you know. And then in a couple of years after that, the AACM got started. But that was in '65, I think, right? Muhal, something like that. I had drifted off
62, 63, 64, right?
64, 65.
Yeah, 63, 64.
Right.
Because 65 is when the AACM came.
The atmosphere at the school that I was at was like, it was charged with like artists, and they were all trying different things. I remember the painters were doing some wild things. Poets, Donnell Lee, all these different poets were there. The musicians was just incredible. I mean, I went up there to register, and Braxton was registered me in the gymnasium. It was $15 to register for school. Malachi Favors, Jackie Jeanette, Russell Mitchell would come out of the service. Joseph Jarman was already there. Bunky was right next door. Bunky Green was right there. The teacher scholarship, and so was Eddie Harris. And a lot of more. Lewis Hall. There was a whole number of musicians. But
we need you to move the mic a little closer.
There was so many.
Using that Betty Carter technique.
There were so many artists that I later became associated with these groups like Obasi, the different artists and the different writers that I came in contact with, and started finding out more about how people were thinking about the whole idea of what freedom meant. Now, let me back up a little bit. I've been listening to music for quite some time, and we were like You know, like I said, we was 12, 13, 14, trying to learn how to play these instruments and listening to the popular music, the most popular music of Charlie Parker and people like that, trying to learn how to play this music. And of course, I knew early at that time that I would never play that music. I knew that was not the music for me. But I had to work on it. And along came Ornette Coleman. When I heard that music, I know I said, this is where I have to go. This is not to play that music, but it became clear. Muhal said something earlier this evening. We were having, people that took Charlie Parker's intent and idea not to play his language, but to become individuals, a real individual in terms of creation. And when I heard people like Ornette and where Coltrane was moving, then everything became clear about freedom. Before that, I didn't understand what freedom just was not even in my mind. So freedom jumped up, and then later, the formation, when I got back, I left Chicago. When I came back to Chicago to join the AACM, everything was already set in motion with the people that was there, and everyone had their own ideas about what they were doing. But there was no, we didn't have any kind of, I don't think we could say that the AACM was a school as such. If anything, there might have been a number of schools. Everybody was a school. And I don't really think that these weren't things that we discussed on being free or anything like that. It was just about to do what you were doing and to get the support of the other musicians to help you do it. That was the main requirement. It was a type of democracy where you have to support other people. You didn't necessarily have to agree, but you had to give of yourself musically. You had to become a tactician, musical tactician, and serve other people to their ends. And whether you agreed or not, it was a great experience for you because you learn things in time anyway. What don't make sense today will make sense tomorrow, you know. So the whole idea of freedom has been like a long journey, and it never stops. Once you find your own language, which that's what the freedom is. You find a language, I believe. A language of expression, whether in literature, paint, or sound, whatever it is, you find a language, and that's what a freedom is. And it is a unique language because it is you. It is not you emulating or mimicking something else. You know? This has been the long-term lesson, and it's the lesson that now you're impelled to become the teacher of yourself. Now you are the teacher and the student, because there's no one to help you from here on.
All right, well, Mr. Steve Colvin, what year did you start playing saxophone, or start pursuing study of music?
What year?
Yes.
1970.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm 26 years and 1 day younger than Muhal.
One day.
Yeah, because his birthday's our birthdays are 1 day apart.
you share some constellations.
Whoa.
You didn't know that?
Huh?
You didn't know that?
Well, I'll tell you something about all of that in a few minutes. Go ahead.
All right.
But I'm very curious about just the impact of the presence of an AACM on your germination, your development at that time.
The first cats I met who were part of the AACM, I didn't even know they were part of the, like when I met you, I didn't know that you were part of this organization. You were just a cat that played piano. That's how I saw it. Same thing when I met you and when I met George Lewis. The George story is kind of funny because we were both at Von Freeman's set, which is Von Freeman's tenor saxophone player in Chicago. It's like the daddy of all of us, Muhal's daddy too. But and so Von was born in 1923, so he's kind of a figure that's always been there. And so he would always have these sessions where he would play. In the beginning, he would play with the guys in his age group, and then he would sort of open it up, and other people would come along and sit in. He had been doing this for years, And so, so one day I was there when I was just starting out, and George, who's not that much older than me, but he's older than me, he was there too. I didn't know George, So Von, he liked to start stuff, so he hooked me and George up together and said, "You two cats come up and play," And so I didn't know George at the time. And George was already, he was already going. And I was just getting in the picture. So I said, "Well, what do you want to play?" He's like, "Oh, doesn't make no difference, So we just played a standard. And George played some stuff, man, I had never heard in my life. I didn't have any idea what he was doing, But it sounded hip. But I didn't know what it was,
Right.
So afterwards, I went up and talked to him, and I said, "Man, that's some other stuff you playing there. Where you been? Where do you hang out? What do you do? And so he's like, "Well, I'm really not even that interested in this music." And I was like, "What? Well, pardon my French. I was like, "You played out of it, It's like, what do you mean you're not interested?" He said, "Well, I've got other things I'm into." And I was like, "Well, what are you into?" And he said, "Well, I got this robot at home." And then the conversation. The conversation just went out from there,
Voyager.
And so that was like my first. I was like, "What the robot?" I was like, And so,
Story. That's amazing.
and everybody I met in this group was like this. They always said something that shocked me, in a kind of really individual direction, And so early on, I realized that I said, "Okay, that's the first thing I noticed, that each one of these guys, they weren't like each other, which is unlike most groups. A lot of people are doing the same thing, or there's something like each other, or there's some kind of stylistic connection or something like that. But each one of these people were thinking for themselves and had an individual thing, And then, the more I got to know Muhal, I understood, sort of, why. In my mind, why it started like that. I didn't really know anybody, but I just felt like, well, that's the idea. The idea was the individualism. So I was going to say this before Henry was talking, was that for me, the freedom is the being yourself, or the seeking out who you are and just pursuing that. It might seem like a no-brainer, maybe for the people in this room, but there's a lot of pressure not to be yourself. In society, there's a lot of pressure. Maybe pressure, I might be understating it. But when you go to school, everything is like to gear you, to sort of herd you in a certain direction, almost like cattle, And so those who, we were talking upstairs, those who decide to, well, I'm going to, pursue this direction I want to pursue, there's always a sacrifice for that, But the way I look at it is like, well, there's a sacrifice for the other stuff too, so, why not, But Von Freeman was one of the people who told me at the beginning, he said, okay, if you decide that you're going to go into this music and you're going to do your own thing, you're going to find yourself, he said it's going to take you longer. Because the cat that's copying will always, people will always hear that first because they already know what that is. So, so they're going to be able to hear that first. Right. It's sort of like popular music, right? What makes it popular, And so, but the person who's going in their own direction, then he or she is always going to have like a harder road to travel, maybe. At least as far as I've seen, let's put it that way,
Right. Right.
And so, but at the same time, everything everybody else said, I think the key is what they've been saying is in the individualism and to pursue, I don't think it's freedom just some blanket that is some term that means, the same thing for everybody. I think, whatever it is that you want to do or whatever, and it might change, 1 year you might feel this way, 2 years from now, you might learn some other stuff and say, well, look, I want to do that, it's sort of like a sediment, it adds up over time. You have these different directions, it's not one language, it's like many languages, you know, that you're dealing with that are sort of layered on top of each other, and it all becomes, you know, what you're doing. So then, for me, freedom is really choice. You know, the choice to move in different directions based on different information that you have, you know, and to use that information as you see fit in different situations. And that means something different for everybody, you know. For Roscoe Mitchell, it might be one thing. For Henry Threadgill, it might be something else. For Amina Claudia Myers, it might be something, you know. Different people have different ways of pursuing that. And that can be a threatening idea,
right.
You know.
Right.
So.
Let me just add,
Oh, sorry.
it's one thing that sometimes gets misrepresented about the term that came along, free jazz. When that term came along, and it meant a lot of different things, and it was applied just kind of across the board to anybody that was doing something different, that wasn't doing the traditional thing. And one thing I can say about my association in Chicago with all of the musicians that with the AACM that I was working with, I can say that we really weren't playing any free jazz. I don't think anyone was playing free jazz. I really don't. Mm-hmm. Everyone that Muhal's music, Roscoe's music, Wadada's music, Braxton's music, Jarman's music, every one of us, we weren't playing free. We were dealing in new motives and structures and information sources in which to create music. But we really didn't hardly play just right off the top, spontaneous improvisational compositions. We might do some improvisational, spontaneous improvisation, but the music that we created was not created that way. It was more, it had an intellectual base to it.
When we say freedom principle, is that a social statement or is it an artistic statement? Which is it? I always thought it was a social statement because I had a conversation early on with the people that named this exhibit, the freedom principle. And I asked them why did they name that. Now, I felt that I could ask because they wanted me to participate. You know. So the thing is, Steve and Henry summed it up good, especially Steve was saying, see, the thing is, perhaps we should, you know, examine that, but we don't have to examine individualism. We don't have to examine that because the creator of everything we see starting with each other, for some reason or other, thought that we should all be individuals. No. So individualism must be important. There's a group of us here. We are a part of the group. But first, we are individuals who contribute to that which is finally characterized as the group. But the individuals contribute to the group. And as Steve said, which I agree, I mean, we talk about a multitude of concepts. A multitude of concepts, you know. Let me put it this way. Free will. Let's use those two words. Free will. That's a social statement, and it's a spiritual statement. However you want to take it. Spiritualism and scientific things are one and the same. The point of view is different. The method of study is different. But the thing itself is one. The thing itself is one. So, the individualism, why is that? Why are there different languages, different tongues saying, I want a loaf of bread? In different tongues, saying the same thing. Why? Why is that? One of the first things we noticed that someone could say in French, I want a loaf of bread. And I say, I want a loaf of bread. With my American accent. Another American would say, I want a loaf of bread. His accent. Rhythms, whatnot like that. So when we talk about this artistic world, we are, in many respects, a reflection of the non-artistic world. Yeah. That's what we are. You know. And by the way, you take the word improvisation. Improvisation is the domain of human beings, not just artists. It's first the domain of human beings. You know. And we might specialize in it. So I'll cook a cake. This is a musical composition. I'll cook a cake with peanuts, strawberries, and bananas, and hot sauce. You know what I mean? And so, for me, that's what we're talking about, because these terms, naming this thing, that's okay if you need a name, but then once you name it, you might miss some of the information because you're looking for certain things then. So that's how you miss the information, you know, because it's the book of changes that we're dealing with. It's the book of individuals that we're dealing with. So do we want to say freedom or do we want to say free will? I want to say free will.
For me, that's what's wrong with some terms like jazz. You know, what you just said, you know, about missing information and assuming that it's in this box, and so you can only look in this location for this information, and then you're not looking everywhere, you know. And that's one of the main things I learned from the AACM is that, you know, okay, these cats look everywhere. You know, I mean, you know, wherever they can find it. I mean, Henry's told me some stuff about stars and space, and you know, and it's like anything. I mean, if you can look up at the stars, then you know that means everything is wide open. You know, and so and like he said, improvisation. That's something you start doing as a baby. You know?
And I want to say this: the AACM is an example of something. It's not the beginning of something. It's not the end of anything. It's an example of something. And just like everybody in this room has some sort of an example as an individual, and we can all learn from it. You know what I mean? So the AACM is just another ringlet in the water after the pebble is dropped in. You know what I mean? It's just an example of something, you know, and if it has inspired people to seek more information regarding the individualism. I mean, we certainly were inspired by things that did that to us, you know what I mean? And like you spoke about Sun Ra. Sun Ra was a separate entity. He had his way, another individual, you know. It all happened in Chicago. There was no similarities, no whatever like that. It was just individuals doing, that was Chicago, doing what they do. But not only Chicago, I'm sure it was a lot of other places, but just to hear my statement in regards to that.
Well, Colleen, you are Californian by birth. These were the three avatars here. Well, emerged, erupted out of the seabed of Chicago. So, but I'm curious about your own kind of journey into the interior, and particularly because when I became aware of your work, it was during one of these cycles when we thought there was a breakthrough moment for black filmmakers. A lot of people were moving or trying to get to where you would come from, if not aesthetically, then economically or There's the whole experimental tradition in New York that certainly kind of defines filmmaking there. You chose Chicago. How much of that was decided upon by the evidence of what Sun Ra done, what the AACM had done, what Afro-Cobra does? Bring that name into the conversation.
You know, it's just this city, this peculiar place that just produces black genius in abundance. And I was curious. I went there on an artist residency 5 summers ago and was supposed to stay for 3 months. And I didn't finish what I came to do, so I came back the next summer. And then I just stayed because through I am a filmmaker, and I think through everything as a filmmaker does, I suppose, but through what I was learning from the AACM, watching them perform, talking to individual musicians, I was learning or teaching myself another way to make films, which I'm still trying to learn and don't even have a language for. And when Mr. Threadgill said, you know, you are the school, I feel that way right now in Chicago, learning from the way in which culture is produced there. And I feel as if even though the conditions that black people live in the city have changed radically from the era that Mr. Abrams described, there is still this unparalleled kind of recognition of cultural production that I still have not encountered in my limited roamings around the country. When I moved to Chicago, I would say, you know, I'd be waiting for the train, and someone would say, "Oh, what do you do?" I say, "Oh, you know, I'm a filmmaker." And they say, "Well, what kind of films do you make?" I'm like, "Well, they're kind of experimental, you know." And it's literally the only city I've ever lived in. When you say that to someone, they don't say, "You mean like Spike Lee?" They would say, no laughing aloud. But
Jimmy's in there.
They would say, "Oh, you mean like your stuff is out, right?" And I'm like, I'd say, "Yeah, that's what I mean." So just the fact that I can have a conversation at the train stop and someone would actually, without seeing my work, have a concept about what it was I was trying to do is just incredible for me.
Well, I mean, but talk about that in terms of just a multidisciplinary practice, too. You know what I mean? Because I know that you consider film the foundation of what you're doing, but I've seen you do wallpaper. I've seen you do flash mob events, you know, where it wasn't about the documentation of the event, it was about the moment. Yeah. I'm just curious, you know, about how the platform, the occasion of the city provokes, you know, the desire to do that kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago definitely provoked that in my work, and I think it has to do, one, with the charged history of the community I live in, which happens to be Bronzeville. It demands, like, on-site, in real time and space, gestures and actions and performances and discourses. It demands it in a way that film was unsatisfactory. I can shoot something on a location, but it's not the same as activating it. And actually, it's really out of a musician envy, to be totally honest, because musicians can not only just go to a site and activate it by their presence through the sound that they make, but they can then communicate with each other spontaneously in that same way. And I'm just so jealous of that.
Yeah. Well, Mual and Henry, this exhibition shares a stage with Afro-Cobra, the work of Wadsworth, Jarrell, Jeff Donaldson, Barbara Jones. Right? Yeah, particularly. And so, I mean, I'm curious about a number of things, just about the social interaction between musicians at AACM, those painters, whether you felt you all were working in a common language, whether they inspired you and other members of the AACM to start thinking about pursuing other art forms in terms of their expression. I mean, I don't know how concurrent those things were, but when I look at the painting Roscoe Mitchell was doing, Jeff Donaldson was doing, I mean, there's clearly like a shared aesthetic, a shared language in terms of in terms of patterning and mythology and different forms of hypnotic color fields and all that kind of thing. So talk a little bit about just that intersection or that conversation that was happening between that group of painters and musicians at the AACM.
You want me to speak?
Sure enough. Or Mr.
Well,
Threadgill? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I was
Yeah,
in
okay.
it, so.
Yeah.
First of all, it goes back to the same thing. It was an atmosphere where individuals were doing what individuals do. Some were trained in painting. Some were trained in music. However, as you know, there are quite a few musicians who paint. And it has nothing to do with knowing painters. I'm one, Roscoe was one, and several other musicians, Joseph Jarman, different people, and Braxton, now Wadada.
Miles.
You know, yeah, Miles, you see. No, I understand what you meant when you talked about the patterning and whatnot, coloring with Jeff Johnson. But Roscoe started painting when he saw me painting. He didn't realize what he had in him, but I did. So he said, well, I want to do some painting. There's two things he did. He said, I want to do some painting here. I said, well, you should pick a brush and buy you some paint and paint. So that was that. Right. So what you saw of him was his innate talent. He's conception-wise, he's a great painter.
Yeah.
Roscoe is.
Yeah.
That's his concept. He would study things and whatnot like that. You know, I don't think he, as far as I know, I don't think he ever talked about encountering Jeff Johnson things, anything. It's just his concept of what he has seen in painting, or what he studied, because he doesn't have any formal training, you know. And incidentally, he asked me the same thing about composition. He said, well, I can do this composition, do some composing. So I said, well, start composing what you're playing on your own. So he started doing it. And he just went from there. So, but back to this general thing, in terms of the painters and the musicians and the poets. You see, the poets didn't leave there were books that they published, but a lot of those things got lost. I have a lot of them at home. I used to collect it from the poets. I knew all the poets, but they were just as productive as the musicians and the painters. Also, there was another group that included all of us that we created called COBRA. Coalition of Black Revolutionary Artists. That included all the painters, all the musicians, and the poets, and the screenwriters. The whole thing, because there were screenwriters there too.
Were the dancers too?
Dancers, the whole thing. Yes. We created an organization called COBRA. The Coalition of Black Revolutionary Artists. And we created it, first of all, as a mechanism to address an event that we thought was disrespectful to the black culture. And that event was an event produced by an unnamed college in Chicago that convened a conference to address the artistic culture, visual and performance, a culture in Chicago, and didn't invite us. So we created this organization one night. First we called it, I'm serious. And so we named it COBRA. And we went to the conference. uninvited, and represented ourselves as Cobra. And so many people showed up at their reception desk in the name of Cobra until they just started letting us in. And that's how they came about. I'm serious. And it was the pain. But moreover, the important thing is we were already in communication because we would associate with each other. We would go to each other's events. You know what I mean? We were closely associated. Jeff Donaldson and all of us were closely associated. So it was easy to convene and address any kind of situation we wanted to address. But the important thing, though, that's some of the aspects of it. But the important thing is that we were already cohesive as a group of people, respecting each other's individualism.
Yeah. Well, that certainly speaks to political coalescing coming together. But I know that, the AACM really, in a breakthrough way, established multidisciplinary collaboration as a face of the organization, as a face of the artistic exploration that you were all working through. And I'm curious about some of those experiments and those coming together.
Let me say this.
Yeah.
Let me say this. I can give it to you just like this. I think Steve hit it on. In the AACM, you could belong to the AACM if you produced your own work. You know what I mean? You had to be an individual that produced your work. Understand? So therefore, each person in the AACM did just that. That's why you see the individualism among us and the distinction among us. You follow me? They had to do exactly what they did. Understand? Push your imagination as far as you can see it. That's how it came about. Each imagination, Steve said it again, we're looking at a multitude of imaginations, you know what I mean? And that's what it is, and that's what it always will be. And that's it. There's no formula, there's no style, there's nothing. There's literally nothing but your imagination. You know, we were like closely associated because we all lived in Chicago. But now, when you left Chicago, it didn't stop the flow of what you were doing because the mandate that you had in the AACM, you could take anywhere, being yourself. And that's it.
Well, Henry, I'm really interested in this whole notion of collaboration and across disciplines, because you've certainly done enough works. And then in the show itself, you've got musicians operating with kinetic sculptors.
Oh,
yeah. George Lewis.
Joseph and I had a lot of things that we were simultaneously interested in theater and dance. I did a lot of work in Chicago in theater and dance as other disciplines outside of music, where I was able to survive because of that. And Jarman had done work like that. You know, he had worked with Kim On Wong. And in this exhibit here, I think they have the poster from the Tibet Book of the Dead. Yeah. I guess it must be now how many years later that I worked with Kim On Wong that we did Fire, Water, and Earth when I joined this company. That must be 10 years afterwards or something like that, possibly. And a number of poets that we were both interested in, Henry Dumas, and the great poet Amos Moore in Chicago. There was a number of both, but I worked in the avant-garde community, which was on the north side of Chicago in terms of theater. Then that was basically a white community of dance and theater, and that was great. I learned a lot in that collaboration. You know, we didn't have that. The South Side just did not flourish in terms of theater companies. You know, there were writers you know, literary writers, but there weren't really companies as such as you could find on them. And one or two dance companies, Darlene Blackburn and I forget the other, much later, can't think of another company that came on much later, you know. But that had always been my interest anyway, words, music, and movement. I've been greatly impressed with that most of my life, you know. Besides the, Chicago was a unique place. What question was, you said something to move up about why Chicago. Yeah, why Chicago? I've often thought about that too. That was a unique moment. There are unique moments in time when there's certain cultural information is present and certain individuals who's inspired to do things. And I think that I feel very fortunate that I was in Chicago at that time, because all of these people in the AACM all became very important people in terms of what they do. And the background, the cultural background, I mean, what I grew up listening to, you know, the blues in Chicago was not, that was unique. I grew up standing in front of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. Mm-hmm. I mean, on Maxwell Street, standing in front of them. I'm serious. As a kid, standing right in front of them, I couldn't move. Not if Howlin' Wolf was singing, I couldn't move. I would get lucky. My grandfather would lose me every time Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf sing. I couldn't move. I was froze. To hear people like that, and to hear Sam Cooke, the Pilgrim Travelers, to hear these people, and Mahalia Jackson, hear these people deliver, stand up and deliver, you know, and then the powerful jazz figures and rhythm and blues people in Chicago. The gospel music was born right there. I grew up in those churches, in those sanctified churches in Chicago. I left Chicago. You all remember I left Chicago playing sanctified music. I came here. Yeah. This is where I came, Germantown, Church of God, Horace Shepherd. Mm-hmm. You all know who Horace Shepherd is? Anybody in here know who Horace Shepherd is? In Germantown, you know that church here? Not too many people from Philly. Horace Shepherd was as big as Billy Graham. It was like a whole big entourage that traveled all over, you know, large group of great musicians. But Chicago was full of this, you know. And again, it was this individualism. You know, when you heard Muddy Waters, you know, you went from Muddy Waters to Howlin' Wolf. I mean, it was like two different worlds, you know. Mm. You know, you stand up and I could stand up and listen to, you know, Von Freeman play, then I stand up and listen to John Gilmore play. All these people were like different, you know. It was something about Chicago, you know, it was like time. They were kind of, it was relaxed enough where you had enough time, I think, to be yourself. Mm-hmm. It wasn't so much tension. You had enough time to work at being what you wanted to be. I think it was that was part of the atmosphere, you know. It wasn't New York City where you had to be on immediately. So it was a little bit more time. We were talking about Cuba earlier. The atmosphere, the artistic atmosphere. There's an atmosphere where you can be an artist. There's a relaxation and time, a sense of time that you feel, and space and a support there, that being an artist is very easy. It's not a strain. You just need to be at it 150%. Mm-hmm. That's all, you know. So this whole thing about this collaboration, Tate, I hope I haven't drifted too far. Mm-hmm. When I came to New York, I didn't do too much of that after that. It was most of the theater. I did a number of small theater productions there.
Did you work with Diane McIntyre?
Oh, yeah.
Just that person?
Yeah, but I worked with Don McIntyre with Ola Dar. That was different, you know. I was working with downtown with some other artists, dancers, and theater people. Don Saunders was there. They had did a number of productions at the Public Theater that I did the music for, you know, or was music director for. And then after a while, that kind of, I didn't get too much more work. It just concentrated on music, you know. So I haven't really done anything across media other than to study it and keep my eyes on it. I'm always looking at, especially sculpture. I'm very interested in that now.
Well, go ahead.
Our theater company in Chicago. There was theater companies in Chicago. Two distinctly. One finally ended up to be ETW, I think it is. Now at that. Anyway, Joan Brown, Abina Joan Brown. That she was one of the people in the early theater in Chicago. And there was Val Gray Ward. Those were two theater companies among the painters and the musicians. Those were the two theater companies. And they put on some pretty great productions during that time. But anyway, the only one left is that ETW, whatever it is out there on South Chicago. You familiar with it? Oh, yeah. It's I think they call it ETW, but Joan Brown, Albina is what she named herself when we started to distribute different kind of names among ourselves. Anyway, it's still in existence. Okay. That was one of the theater companies.
Do you remember any filmmakers?
Huh?
Do you remember any filmmakers?
There were people among them who were, I think, probably, there were some people dabbling in film, but we didn't get a lot of that. You know, but there were some people, dabbling in film, but it didn't become as prominent during that time as the theater and the poets and the musicians and the visual artists, the painters. Yeah.
How long have you been there in Chicago? 5 years. Have you hooked up with Theaster's people at all?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
Trying to stay out of his shadow.
Well, Muhal asked the question earlier about the freedom principle. Is it a social statement or an artistic statement? And it's interesting because, of course, there's a whole body of writing that came out of the Black Arts movement that certainly saw a connection between the sonic statement and the social statement. And I'm going to take this around you, Henry, in a roundabout way related to a story I heard you tell somewhere else. But it has to do with the fact that our friend, great late Butch Morris, when he was in the Army, he was originally stationed in Stuttgart, and he said that fistfights, race riots would break out between black and white soldiers at that time, particularly if black soldiers were playing John Coltrane and Nina Simone's music. And the level of violence that Butch found there was such that, without knowing it, he basically said, he said, ship me anywhere, I don't care, and they sent him to Vietnam. I know you have a story about how music, in a sense, got you sent to Vietnam as well, so I just wondered if you'd share.
Bush told the authorities to do what? To move him from Stuttgart?
The thing basically was like, he was a truck driver in Stuttgart. He said there was so much violence in the barracks that he was on uppers all the time, and he asked the doctor to up his dosage. The doctor said, I can't do that, you'll just become addicted. So Butch said, well, just ship me out of here anywhere, I don't care. And he said because of kind of the underreporting of what was going on in Vietnam at that time, he said until he actually got back to L.A., that people told him, like, you going where? You know what I mean? He had no idea what Vietnam was, you know, because he was just reading Army papers. You know.
A lot of people didn't.
Yeah. But
we were there, we didn't know each other.
Yeah.
We were in the same spot in Play Cool.
Right.
We were in Play Cool in Central Highland. But I got there, I was in Kansas. I was in the, I forgot which band I was in, but I had a position, I was arranging composer. So I didn't even have to wear army clothes. And so I was just sitting up writing music and getting high.
Wow.
Being frank and enjoying myself. And nothing like the truth. Nothing like the truth. I sure didn't enjoy myself. Anyway, I had an assignment to write a medley. And medley was supposed to cover these certain kind of Americana songs. Oh, Beautiful, different things, songs like this. America, Beautiful, all these different songs like this. And so medley is like little snippets of a piece, little snippets of it like that, right? And I think he said, even somebody said, yeah, you can even have a little bit of Rock of Ages or something like that. So the band director, the warrant officer who directed the band, he went away on a trip, and the second conductor led the rehearsals. I wrote the music, and the band really loved it. Well, I was studying a lot of Stravinsky, and I'm listening to Cecil Taylor, Coltrane, and Bartok. Right. And so I was putting all of these things together in my own language, right? And they didn't tell me what this thing was for. I wrote it, we rehearsed it, we went to Kansas City, right? We went to Kansas City on I think it was on a Thursday. It was like on a Thursday or something. And it was the governor, the mayor of Kansas City, the Archbishop of the Midwest was there, the head of the Fifth Army, the head of the AirCom, Air Force unit, all these dignitaries were there. The conductor came back and was going to conduct the music on the fly. Came back to conduct the piece right there.
He hadn't seen it.
Had seen it. That wasn't the problem. That wasn't the problem. The music, he gave the downbeat, he conducted, they got into the music for about, 8-10 bars, and the Archbishop jumped up on the platform, this is outside in the public, jumped up and said, "Who's responsible for this blasphemy?" And the band director, who's about ready to have a bowel movement, points at me, and the first song, everybody points at me. I'm sitting on the sideline, looking like everybody else. I'm sitting like, what did I do? He wrote it. So the Fifth Army, the generals came down, and I guess you can imagine, the governor is embarrassed, the Fifth Army, they come down there and told the band, get out, pack up and leave. Wow. So we get on the bus to go back. I'm getting the cold shoulders, some cold breeze. I get on the bus. And everybody's looking this way. I get on the bus. Everybody's walking, everybody's heading this way. I'm getting on the bus, I go straight to the back. The warrant officer said, "Threadgill, tomorrow morning you back in the band." I said, whoa. I said, what's the problem? He said, "Back in the band." I said, okay. So I had to put on a uniform and go back, play clarinet. I was clarinet player and a saxophone player, so I went back to the rehearsal at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they had a lunch break. Then there's a 1 o'clock one. They came back at the 1 o'clock rehearsal. We sat down to play. Look, we sat down, and the door opened, and a messenger came in a full green uniform with handcuffs and a briefcase. And they called attention. They said, "Everybody stop. Attention. This guy pulls out these papers." start reading in this foreign language because that's what it sounds like, you know. Blah, 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 so-and-so, blah, 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 you know, the Aircom 915, so-and-so, blah, it would be 6 to so-and-so, regular. I said, is that me? I said, it would be 6 to so-and-so, pay. I said, where's that? You know, they say, shh, quiet, you know. So the guy said, you have 30 days to go home and get your life together and report to Oakland. I said, get my life together? What's that? I said, what's going on? Am I sick? You know? Yes, and report to Oakland, California. So you'll be shipped to Wake Island. They'll transport to pick you up and take you to the 4th Infantry. I said, to the who? What? I said, 4th Infantry. For what? Well, I had an agreement with the Army. I had a contract, matter of fact. I had a contract. I went into the service because they were getting ready to draft me, and the draft board knew me, and they told me, said, if I volunteer to go in and stay 6 months longer than anybody, I can be a musician. And they can't, if they ever violate it, they have to give me an honorable discharge. So I said, okay, I'll take that deal. And so when they sent me over there, they sent me to the 4th Infantry Division. So I said, okay, I said, I'm suing your ass. I said, that's it. This ain't going to work. I went there, I was in the band. They put me in the band, 4th Infantry band. So the guy came, I said, man, you can't, I said, you know, what's with this? He said, you in the band, ain't you?
The band in Vietnam?
Yeah. He said, you in the band, ain't you? He said, well, let me remind you. It says 4th Infantry band. So that's the dirty. Music can get you killed.
Great. That's a great one.
Yes, sir.
Take it on ride. Take it on ride. That's great. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yes, indeed.
People don't have a sense of humor.
He actually said, who's responsible for this blasphemy?
Right.
Yeah, he jumped and said, who's responsible for this blasphemy? What's he talking about? Nobody's reading scripture here.
Oh, man.
Years before Jimmy and the Star Spangled Banner in Woodstock. Right?
Oh. That was
You know, I became interested in that piece of music
Oh.
years later, but it got lost. It was in my grandmother's house for years, in a box of material that I'd left there when I'd moved out of there. And some of my young cousins and nieces got hold of it.
The Star Spangled Banner?
Well, his
That arrangement. It wasn't great. You know, I just became
Those 8
curious.
bars
I
of
just wanted
Devil's
to see it again.
Oh, you mean
it wasn't great, but it was just evidence of what I was doing at the time. And I would have liked to have seen it, but the kids got hold of it. They fixed that. You know.
Man, well, Steve, I hate to put you on the spot to follow that.
I can't follow that.
No, but you're not. I think we're going to put you in that position. But, you know, when we met in New York, of course, you and your brother had a house in Fort Greene. You were urban pioneers. You didn't know it at the time. But that was also where I met Cassandra Wilson and John Paul Borelli and Greg Osby. And just talk about the creation of that kind of collective in New York at that time, how that drew upon your Chicago experiences. Yeah.
Well, I mean, me being from Chicago, you know, I knew about all of what was happening there and everything. And a lot of what you talked about, Henry, was still happening, you know. Because I played with Junior Wells and all those cats. I would go down to the blues clubs and play with them, and then I would, switch over and do some stuff with the crowd that was hanging around Vine. And then, go play with the funk stuff that was happening at the time, which I viewed as like the younger version of the blues, basically, And so there was all those things were still happening in Chicago. It hadn't. It was still a lot like. I thought it was a lot of clubs happening when I was growing up until I talked to somebody from Muhal's generation, and they were telling me about 63rd Street and all the stuff that was happening. I realized, okay, it was even more, that was happening. But I thought it was a lot, But and it was a lot in New York too when I first got there. Yeah. The loft scene was happening. There was all these clubs in town. there's places in Brooklyn, you know. I mean, every night there was something to do, you know. After hours places that would open after the gigs would stop, you know. And so, you know, when I met, you know, Graham Haynes and Cassandra and Greg and all these people, Jerry Allen, you know, from Detroit, you know, we would all trade stories about our hometowns and what was happening and everything, you know. So a lot of them, at that time when we first arrived in New York, they didn't know a lot about the AACM and stuff like that, you know. So I was like, you know, telling them about the organization. I was like, you know, we need to do something like that. You know, cats organized and, you know, get their own music, you know, and all this stuff, you know. So it was an inspiration, you know. I mean, and eventually, you know, all these people got to know Henry and Muhal and everything, you know. But I met them early on because they were my generation, and we all hit the city around the same time. Well, Graham was already here. His father's Roy Haynes, you know. But the rest of us all hit the city around the same time. I found out about Cassandra when I went through Mississippi. Me and Graham hitchhiked through the South for 3 months.
Oh,
you know.
see, I never did that.
Yeah, so we went through Jackson, and that's when I found out about Cassandra. And then we went through New Orleans, and we went, you know, all these places. Because I had never extensively gone through the South, you know. So, so my father thought I was crazy. He was like, "You gonna hitchhike where?" Because he was born in 1928, so he was.
Mississippi, the state you just drive through without stopping.
Yeah. He said, "You too stupid to know, but you're gonna find out." It took us 3 months, man. We hitchhiked all through the South, you know.
Wow.
And
the new South.
And and I'm telling you, I saw this book that lists the chances of you getting picked up when you're hitchhiking, and that, you know, like white female, but you know, the bottom of the list was 2 black males. You know, so I mean, there was like, you know, but it was, you know, we learned a lot. We went through all these places, and you know, ran into like all these people and stuff like that. The first place we hit was Phineas Town, Memphis.
Oh, Memphis.
Yeah, you know. Because that's right down, what is that, 57, 55? What is that goes straight
55,
to 55, yeah. You know, that's straight down, you know. So we went to Memphis, and then we went to, after Memphis, we went to Jackson, we went to New Orleans. That's a straight line. Went to Baton Rouge, came back up to Jackson, and then started going, we started going through Tennessee, went to Nashville and all that kind of stuff. And the last place we hit was Atlanta, Georgia, before we started heading back up to New York, you know. So we had it kind of planned out, but it took a long time because, like I said, you don't get picked up too often, you know. So it took a while.
Not even as charming and innocent as I remember you and Graham being at that time.
But we played on the street at the time, you know, for a living. Yeah. So we always did the same thing. We would get to a town, we would go to a park in the middle of the town, we'd take out our horns and start playing. Okay. And right away we would meet musicians. It was like some Pied Pipers type stuff, you know. Right away we would meet cats because first of all, nobody played like us in these areas. This was like, things were still pretty local then, where people in different places sounded different based on where they came from. There used to be a time when somebody came from a certain place and they would have a certain sound in their playing, you know. I don't know with the internet and all that, and the schools, if it's quite the same now, you know. But, you know, it used to be like a cat came from a certain place, they had a certain way of phrasing or something, you know. I mean, it was like that. So if you went to another place, you would sound like an alien. I mean, comparatively speaking, you know. You know, so it was real interesting to us because different people had different sounds, and you know, and there was a lot of blues stuff in a lot of the players down south, you know. And so, and then we all ended up in the city at around the same time, you know. So, I mean, that may be what you were referring to.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
As far as the organizational part, like I said, we looked at BAG, we looked at the AACM, we looked at what Horace Tapscott was. I mean, we looked at everybody who was doing anything. You know, I mean, places, people in Detroit, people in Philly, you know, anybody who was organizing anything, whether they had a name for it or not. Right. You know, just people coming together and doing stuff, going all the way as far back as James Reese Europe, you know, all the way to today. You know, I mean, we were just trying to study like the whole history of people getting together and doing something. Right. You know, whatever it was. You know, right. And so you all were a big part of that. So you know, that's how we looked at it.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. Well, Colleen, I mean, we're gonna open it up for questions in a second, but I wanted you to talk about the piece you have in the show, that cinematic altar, because you actually, what you've done in there is create what I would call a interface representation of Alice Coltrane and the AACM, which You know, and I'd just like you to talk about that journey and being on the land of Alice Coltrane.
I'll try to be brief because I know there are questions, but it's thinking about improvisation. The piece is called Space Station Little Instruments. Little Instruments being an homage to, of course, you know, the art ensemble. And I always loved the way that they approached sound and like kind of flattened everything out, and anything was capable of serious sound. So I had this, I stumbled on this very strange African figurine, this twin Dogon statue, and they're playing a balafon, which is one of the really ancient, you know, musical instruments on the earth. But knowing this particular statue is a little bit odd, and I asked a lot of different scholars, where is this thing from and what is this thing's deal? And everyone was very hesitant to sort of tag it because it's not, it's a rare. So I was fixated on Dogon twins playing a balafon. This just seems epic in terms of our origin story as black people. I'm researching Alice Coltrane, and then I stumbled, and I was thinking about improvisation. So there's a video artist named Namjoon Paik. You may be familiar with, Korean artist who radically innovated video art in the United States in the 60s. And he had this really kind of like parallel ideas about improvisations. In the 60s, he was doing a show, and he had like just an empty spot, and he just didn't want it to be dead. So he hooked up a CCTV camera to a Buddha and this cool little TV and made this feedback loop, so Buddha was looking at himself on television. And that piece is just seminal. Like, you'll see it everywhere. It's like a trademark. He taught himself something with this piece. He taught himself something that he repeated then over and over for decades. And I'm just interested in people who know how to teach themselves something that good, right? So I copied it. And so what you're seeing is sort of like an homage to these ideas about looking and gazing and trying to sort of access sort of like these spiritual quests, the Dogon twins, Alice Coltrane. There's a more personal element there with the moss and the grass, because my father is a bonsai master, and he does a lot of rock gazing, and I grew up around this, and so that became part of the cinematic landscape that the camera creates for you. You can choose how to see all of these things. You can choose to see them as individuals. You can choose to see them as integral. So, sorry.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Beautiful. And now it's your turn to dialogue as individuals. To exercise your free will. Put in your questions, these wonderful artists. Anyone?
Good evening. My name is Taji Nall, and I'm an artist here based in Philadelphia. And this was a great master class. I really appreciate it. So I don't have any questions. Last time I seen Steve, he was doing a crazy show here in Philadelphia a few years back. Same thing with our good brother here. And I just want to say, Jamaluddin Takuma, a good friend of mine, he said, tell your guys hi.
Okay.
Yeah. Jamaluddin.
Hello. Not a question, but just an acknowledgement for Mr. Muhal Richard Abrams. Interestingly enough, I was 18 years old, a student at Penn, and I was listening to Harrison Ridley Jr., who's a historian, and he was doing a 2 or 3 year project on jazz from A to Z, and your name was the first name that he came up with, Muhal Richard Abrams, down to, I think, Joe Zawadu. So it's a pleasure to meet you after over 45 years of hearing about you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. The best to you, man. The best to you. Thank you. Yes.
That's the advantage you always
first.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. This is directed towards Steve. I was kind of had a part with observer of what I call the counter, what they call the restoration, the counter restoration of jazz in New York back in the 80s. What you did with Jerry, good friend of mine, Graham, Oz, and those cats and those folks. How much did, see, I never knew this about you. I forgot you were from Chicago, and so I don't know how, your AC experience interacting with the AACM influenced your M-base projects. How much of an influence did they have on that?
Well, we weren't really looking at it in terms of names, Yeah. I mean, even when we were looking at the AACM, I mean, we weren't really looking at the names, we were looking at the people, and what kind of information they were dealing with and what they were doing. I mean, and in terms of how they worked together, that was always interesting to me, how some people could work together and still maintain individuality, because as you might know, there's groups that do exactly the opposite, where they work together and they try to force each other into a certain, I mean, I won't mention names.
Those who shall remain.
Yeah, yes. And part of the idea is that, no, you got to do this. I mean, this is what we do, and if you want to be a part of this, you have to do this, And just looking at examples of people who didn't do that, I mean, there was no pressure that Henry had to do exactly what Muhal was doing or whatever, and yet they could still, work together. That's one of the things that we were interested in, because all of the people who I was interested in, going all the way back, were, I don't even want to use the word creative, they were just themselves, I mean, and this goes back to, all the people we were talking about upstairs, Charlie Parker, all these people, but in whatever, every discipline, And that was the thing that was interesting to me. I was trying to hook up with and find examples of people who were doing that, whether it was an organization or not an organization. I always admired longevity also, and anybody that could, like Duke's band and people like that could stay together for like a really long period of time. That was always something that I wanted to do right from the beginning. Was work with some people or have an ensemble or whatever, and have it go over a long period of time, because you learn different things over successive years and successive periods, like that, So when I saw the first band, when I moved to New York, the first band I saw was Air, was Henry's band. That was the first. I don't know if you remember that, Henry. I saw you all Beefsteak Charlie. So that was the first band I saw. And then I talked to Henry. I'd already met Henry in Chicago. I talked to him. I said, well, where do you think I should go next? And he said, well, have you heard Black Arthur? I was like, Black who? And that's what they called Arthur Blythe back then, And so he said, well, you should, he said, you should go down to Sweet Basil's and hear Black Arthur. If you want to hear alto tone, you got to hear this cat, And I had never heard of him, And I walked down towards Sweet Basil's because it was walking distance from where you all was playing. And you remember that deli called Smiley's or whatever it was? I got there, which is a block away from Sweet Basil's, and I can hear this cat from outside. I was like, whoa,
Yeah, he had a sound.
Yeah, and then I went in there, and he had it was like him, something like him, bass, cello, and piano, something like that. It was a dude named. Yeah. And so after hearing that and hearing Air, I was like, okay, I'm gonna stay here. Because I was like, because if you can make a living doing what these two groups did, then this is the place I want to be. Because that was my problem in Chicago. I mean, I really appreciated growing up there and everything, but after a while, it got tight in terms of trying to expand. That's what I felt, personally, At the time I came along. Now, when you all came along, it might have been different, but I wasn't part of a group,
Pretty much the same. You see, we created a forum for ourselves.
Right. Well, I didn't have that. Yeah. But I mean, I got to New York in '78. Did you get there when, '76 or '77, or when did you move there?
Well, I was in New York earlier, but I didn't move till '77. But I was in New York earlier.
And you were there about 4 years earlier than that, or something like that?
'76. I first went there in '69, and then I came back to Chicago. I didn't stay. I went and stayed over the summer to check it out, and came back to Chicago. We went back in '76.
Right. Because I remember, I didn't know whether you lived in Chicago or not, but I remember meeting you in Chicago. I remember meeting you in Chicago and even playing with
I
you.
used to see you up at Bonds with this other, what was that kid, the other little algebra player?
Glenn.
Huh?
Glenn, the cat that was hanging with me. Yeah, yeah.
The two of them will always be up there with Von Freeman.
Yeah. Well, we didn't know what was happening, but we was trying to find out. You know, I mean, that was the thing. And we were self-taught, you know, I mean, but we were just trying to, I would take a little tape recorder, I would tape them, and I would go home and try to figure out, like, okay, what is this based on? It's got to be based on something, you know. I mean, you know, so that was my way of figuring it out. And then when I would hear stuff that was a little off from that, what most of the people were doing, I would try to figure out, well, what's that? You know, what are these guys doing? You know, I mean, so they were a big inspiration for me. I mean, it wasn't. Some people tried to get me in the AACM earlier after you guys had left. You know, and I was like, you trying to get me? Why these cats are leaving? You know, that's what I was thinking. You know, I was like, where are they going? You know, I was like, you know. So I wanted to know where everybody was going, you know. I mean, because everybody I knew, like Chico and George, you know, cats was leaving, you know. And I was like, well, where are these guys going? And so
you were right, it was like a ceiling. We left because it was like a ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had done all we could do there.
Right, right. You mean a creative ceiling?
Yeah. And
No.
She give me the mic.
And I just think, you know, we just moved on, you know.
I didn't mean a ceiling for myself, though.
No, I'm talking about, you know, it wasn't a plan. It wasn't a plan that Air was going and Muhal was going, and we didn't plan this.
Oh, okay.
It's, I think we just like it ran the limit of what we could do right there, and you know, and that's why we moved to and that was the market. You know, that's where the farmers, you take your things to the market. Mm-hmm. That was the market, so that seemed like the best place to go at the time, you know.
Besides, we had said our names all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
We were well known all over the world. So we had to leave.
Yeah.
You know, we were known all over the world through the recordings we made with Delmar.
Mm-hmm.
We were known, and then the Art Ensemble and
the Paris
Brax
thing
and others traveling there. We were known all over the world. So, you know, I either moved to move with this momentum that I had built for myself, or, you know, perhaps that would have been another Muhal Richard Abrams that didn't look like me. Just look like somebody else. I mean, it was possible, you know. But, so, but anyway, it's just a natural order of things. We went where we were supposed to go. That's it. You know, we used to be someplace else. Anyway,
Oh, question.
Yeah, I'm still curious about how Paris played a role in this diaspora of ensemble and AACM from Chicago. I know that in the late 60s and early 70s, this was a big thing in France. And I'm curious as to, when you say you moved all over the world, was France the first place you guys began playing, or Switzerland? Yes.
That was the place where the art ensemble went to.
Yeah.
And that was the place where the revolutionary ensemble went to.
Uh-huh.
But they went there because Paris had become the artistic capital. New York was not the artistic capital. It came back to New York. And everybody was in Paris. I mean, Johnny Griffin, Dexter Gordon, Don Byers, it was the writers were there, the painters were there, you know.
well,
Sam Middleton, there was all these painters, well-known painters.
Oliver Jackson.
And then when we moved to New York, that's when the shift happened. All of these people came back from Europe. People came from California, that whole California crowd, the St. Louis crowd, the Detroit crowd. It wasn't just music. Inazaki Shange, all of them came from California. This was the writers, the poets. It was a cultural move in the United States and in the world. It was a bunch of people from France, Switzerland, musicians from everywhere that came to New York at that time. New York was dead when we got there. We actually brought it back to life.
Yeah, that's true.
that's what they say.
Dead.
Can I say something regarding? about Paris and all that. Yeah. What happened is there was a gentleman from the magazine called Actuel, Claude Delclue. Claude Delclue sent the AACM a letter and an invitation to come to Paris because we had all these recordings out. So the art ensemble, one of our groups, decided to take him up on the application. It could have been any of us.
To live in Paris or just to
He wanted to bring the music to Paris. He wrote it to me as the president of AACM. Just a moment. And so the art ensemble decided to take him up on it, right? And the format that the art ensemble had was originally, in its rudimentary stages, an AACM format. The AACM was like what you saw the art ensemble do, except for the art ensemble fine-tuned it and developed it to a very fine degree. But that was the AACM. Little instruments and all that stuff, that's what we did. Theater. John, when he mentioned John was a theater man, you know. And we had theater on the stage, singers, dancers, whatnot like that. The little instruments and everything, gongs and everything. So the art ensemble, they were AACM, so they took that format. Like I said, they individualized it to a degree that was just masterful. But they were the first ones to go. And they went to Paris to follow up on that invitation that Claude Delclue sent to us. That's how that happened. And afterwards, the Revolution Ensemble followed them and whatever like that.
There was a magazine, too. Remember that?
Actuel.
Actuel. We wrote for that magazine. I wrote an article in '69 for that magazine. There was a number of us.
Actuel.
I don't remember exactly how many people that were still remaining there. But that's when I first recorded with Muhal. It was like '69 with Wadala. He had come back to New York. But we wrote some articles for them at that time, you know. Oh, yeah.
I think, well, you talk about
Yes, gentleman here.
Too late.
Sorry. Yeah. Did you have a mic? Who's hand?
These days, if somebody wanted to start a kind of experimental ensemble, especially an ambitious one, it would be very difficult to find space unless they had funding or they were connected to an institution. I'm very curious about what kinds of spaces you improvised with or repurposed in order for you to make the music that you made when you were in Chicago.
We stand up in the street so I can see you listen.
Sure, yeah.
Now, speaker, say it again.
Sure. These days, if you wanted to create a kind of experimental ensemble, it'd be very difficult to find space unless you were well-funded or connected to an institution. And I'm wondering what kinds of spaces you all invented in and gathered in and repurposed and improvised in order to make your invention happen.
At that time, you mean?
Yes.
Who are you asking now?
Any of you. Any of
you. Okay, well, first of all, you have to get out of your own way. The first thing you talked about was an obstruction. You don't start with the space, you start with the audacity. That's what you start with. The whole notion that you would say, I'm going to create me something. So where am I? I'm in my bedroom. I'll start right here. You see, because the funding and whatnot like that, we had no funding. The AACM had no funding. We never did. We never had funding. In fact, on many days, what we would do, though, we persisted to the point where we got donated spaces, you know, and we would take those spaces and produce concerts in them, you understand? And charge $1 or $2 at the door. So at the end of the night, we might be splitting up $2. $2 among 15 to 20 people, you know what I mean? But it didn't matter. We would come back the next day and do the same thing all over the city. We just kept doing it, you know what I mean? And because the idea was just to do the thing. Now, today is different, but that having an attitude like that is not different.
Right, right.
You know, if you really want to do something, now young people doing it today.
Yeah.
If you really want to do it, then you will, you know, you'll do it. You know what I mean? But I don't know if that answers your question, but I noticed that you put the obstruction first.
Well, I was just asking about what specific spaces you were using.
Well, it didn't matter.
What you can get.
As long as you walked in and pulled your instrument out and started doing it and opened the door and let people come in.
Let me say something. The AACM, I remember coming back to Chicago, and I think we was at the Jane Addams house.
Oh, yeah.
What was the name of that place? Hull House.
Hull House.
And this is a space that was given, dedicated.
Yeah.
Now, AACM, these musicians were like, we got a Gestetner machine. We got up our money and got a Gestetner machine.
Miss Gaddy gave us that.
Right. We got this machine, and we put out our own advertisement, printed our own cards, and would blanket the city. We would go to all of the major train stops and be waiting for people to get off from work, pass this up, be out all night putting up things. Nobody ever got tired. We didn't get tired. We didn't get weary. As that Max Rosa would say, members don't get weary. We sure didn't get weary. We did not get weary. We could be out all night and go back and write music and come back and play. It was the mendacity of it. It was the aggressive attitude that, like Julie, my mother always said, she said, why you all have to always be with extremists? She was a big fan of the AACM. She said, why you always get associated with extremists? She recognized it from the very beginning that they were extremists, you know. And I said, I can't be with anything else.
Determination.
Yeah. You know, so like Muhal said, it was this, we could be in one room. It was going to happen. The energy, the will to do it, you know, there was no obstacle. We just said, we're doing this, and that's the end of that. That's a great feeling. There'd be no failure, you know. You just go and do it. You say, we're going to put on this event, we would do it, you know. It really should be was really an amazing experience to have that experience with some human beings, you know.
May I ask the gentleman, did you ask that question because you are contemplating doing something yourself?
Well, I'm interested in the ways in which artists retool spaces meant for one thing and use them for another.
That wasn't your question, though. Well, I was just trying to find out why you asked. Because I thought I could give you some more information that would fit today's circumstances. But go ahead. This is different.
Yeah, I'm interested in the ways in which, you know, folks who are on the margins take something that's meant for one thing and use it for another thing in order to invent things.
But that wasn't your question.
Black people have always
I wasn't too successful when I talked to you. I'm sorry. Good.
I think we had a question over there.
Black people have always done that.
So again, I just want to compliment and piggyback on what a wonderful gathering this is. You know, I have a couple of questions. You know, one actually for the moderator, but also I want to come back to Henry as well. And you know, Steve spoke about, you know, that way of thinking, M-base and what have you, and the inspiration coming from AACM and other places. Black Rock Coalition for you, Greg Tate. You know, was it similar type energy? That bubbling up that was taking place in New York. But also, Henry, you spoke about your time in Philadelphia. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that and how that happened and when that happened. But let Greg go so we can get you the microphone. All right.
64, 65, I think I was here. 64. Anybody you all got those toys? Look up Horace Shepherd. I'm surprised nobody here ever heard
Toys.
of Horace Shepherd. I was here with the Simpson family. You know any of those musicians? The Simpson family, singer, violin, soprano. I lived with them at the time, and I traveled with Horace Shepherd, great Alan Turner, pianist. It was a large group of musicians. We just traveled from campgrounds into big evangelist meetings. It was really like kind of a raiding party. It was, it was the same way that Billy Graham operated on the same way. He sent out these singers, sent out this group to do this, and that's what Horace Shepherd had. And this Church of Guards in Germantown, South Philly, that's one of the biggest churches, the most powerful sanctified churches here in Philadelphia. So I stayed here for a couple of years and traveled the country to West Middlesex and different places, even down in the islands. They had some great evangelists down there that competed with Horace Shepherd. Horace Shepherd started out as a child wonder. I used to see Horace Shepherd in Chicago, 31st and King Drive in tents when I was a kid. He was a preacher. I used to go see him when I was 6 or 7 years old, preaching on 31st and King Drive in those tents. We all laughed.
What was it called then?
It was called Boy Wonder.
No, King Drive. What was it called?
Oh, that was South Park.
Yeah, right.
South Park at that time.
I'm something for everybody.
But he was known then as a child minute preacher. Anybody find his name? Huh? Horace Shepherd. You found it, right?
Yeah, but I can't tell when he was active. It basically says 7.
Okay. But anyway, that was like, I traveled with him for a couple of years until I went into the service. And up to 66, I went into the service. When I came back out of service, that's when I came back from St. Louis, working with BAG, and then back to AACM to join up with the AACM. Because my association had been initially with the experimental band. And then I went off with these religious people. And when I came back to play with the heathens. And the infidels.
Let Greg tell his. Let him tell his. He asked Greg about his situation. I think he's next.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just going to say, right before I left D.C. to come to New York, Intozaki Shange was doing a Q&A, and a young lady said she wanted to come to New York and be an artist. And Intozaki, but she was nervous, and Intozaki said, "Oh, you must come to New York. It's like there you'll meet like the most amazing artists and photographers and dancers and writers." And the young lady said, "How am I going to meet all those people?" She said, "Oh, they'll be your friends." So first time I saw M-Bass group perform was at a gallery I was working at called Jam, which is also where the Black Rock Coalition was born. That's the first place I saw Lorna Simpson's work. Lorna was part of a theater group that Lisa Jones, Amiri's daughter, put together called Rodeo Caledonia. And so basically I always tell people, like, in the 80s, everything that was happening culturally worth talking about in America was happening below 14th Street. And we all were just tripping over each other all the time. And we found out we had common interests. So Steve and Graham were early, believers and members of the Black Rock Coalition. And the thing about that early period was that a lot of musicians were actually scared to be associated with the BRC because we had a manifesto that sounded like it was written by a bunch of extremists. Yeah. One of the first guest speakers we had was Lester Bowie, who told us, he said, "Well, y'all already going to have problems because you're thinking people, and that's the last thing the industry wants to see." That was Lester's encouragement to us, you know what I mean? So, but that was the environment. It all seemed inevitable. Yeah.
Also, I think, just going back to the whole collective in today's time, the West Coast get down, what's happening over there with Marcy Washington and people like that, it seems like there's a whole lot of positive activity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very interesting situation because it's also, all those guys in Kamasi's group, they've been playing together since they were 14 years old. And they were trained, a lot of their parents were musicians, they were trained by people who were part of Horace Tapscott collective, right? And then they also did what, you were talking about. They went out and created the spaces, because, I mean, LA really has no jazz scene, so they would just go up in the supper clubs, restaurants, and say, churches said, you got this space open between 3 to 6, can we come in and do a concert? When they went to record Kamasi's album, they recorded albums by about 5 or 6 other members of the group. So, I mean, that spirit, and that idea of collective work, cooperative economics, all the 7 principles, were again, that whole history. And then they're also part of, like, the hip-hop chitlin circuit. It's like those cats would do the kind of music they do with Kamasi's band with each other, and then they go off and play with Snoop, or Dre, or Erica, those folks too. So, it's just interesting to look at the way the cycle repeats itself in the way there's an ecosystem to support all these things that were present in the Midwest and the other parts of the country. Like now they're all present in LA, because of this long continuity of history in terms of experimental hip hop and experimental improvisation. Yeah. And I think we're out of time. I didn't mean to give myself the last word. Thank you, Henry Threadgill, Colleen Smith, Muhal Richard Abrams, Steve Coleman. Thank you all.
Somebody give you the cue?
Yeah. I got the cue.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I was wondering how you knew.
Oh.
That's all right.
Somebody played the theme song or something.
So lovely. Oh, thank you. So lovely to meet you. Take care.
All right. Well, how do we get to see this exhibit? You said you were talking. Who you talked to?
Anthony. And I told Lisa that he was going to take you through.
Okay.
We have to go back to that room. They're same here. Same here. Same here. It's good to meet you and good to hear, what you're doing. Good to hear you speak. Here. Yes.